The RTX 4080 comes out next week on November the 16th, and reviewers officially have the card in their possession, so that means benchmarks are starting to leak out. On videocards.com, we have some benchmarks of the 4080 and 3D Mark Time Spy. Now, these benchmarks do come from a well-known leaker known as Mega Size GPU, which is considered to be a credible leaker. I'm not really sure who's credible and who's not, so definitely take this with a grain of salt. And even if the numbers are correct for this user's configuration, it can still vary based on the type of hardware that was being used. We have no idea what the RAM was, DDR4 versus DDR5. We have no idea what the motherboard was. We have no idea what the CPU was. So there's a whole lot of stuff we still don't know. So even if the numbers are accurate for this one user, it doesn't mean it will be indicative for everyone who purchases a 4080. And lastly, of course, synthetic benchmarks do not always lead to direct gaming performance numbers. But with all of that being said, let's have a little bit of fun here and let's look at the 4080's numbers and let's try and compare those to the AMD 7900 XTX. Okay, so looking at the chart, we can see very clearly that the RTX 4080 at 4K is coming in with a score of 14,178, which is 73% of the 4090's overall performance. And on the 1440p side of things, we can see that the 4080 is actually 80% of the 4090's performance, coming in with a score of 28,599. And if you're like me and you already have a RTX 3080, we have those numbers to look at too here. The 3080 10GB at 1440p is about 49% of the 4090's performance, and the 12GB model is 52%. And over on the 4K preset, the numbers drop off just a little bit more, with the 3080 10GB model being only 46% of the 4090's performance, and the 12GB model is 48% of the 4090's performance. Now, the reason why I talk about the 3080's performance is because more and more people are starting to get a 3080, and so if you have a 3080, you can see for yourself what the 4080 may be able to offer over a 3080. I still get comments all the time where people ask me if they should go ahead and buy a graphics card now or if they should wait. And so if you're in the market right now for a GPU, I would recommend just waiting at this point. The 4080 comes out next week, and so we'll be able to look at all the third-party benchmarks and make final conclusions based on that. And then December the 13th, AMD will be dropping their new cards with the 7900 XT and the 7900 XTX. Now, speaking of AMD's upcoming cards, let's try and take the 7900 XTX and compare it to the 4080's performance. Now, you may be saying, well, we don't really know how the 7900 XTX performs in 3D Mark Time Spy. And you're right, we don't. But what we do know is that the 7900 XTX is meant to be a direct competitor with a 4080. And we also know, based on charts that AMD provided, that the 7900 XTX is expected to be anywhere between 1.5 times up to 1.7 times the performance of a 6950 XT at 4K. And if you look at our chart here, you can see very clearly we do have performance numbers for the 6950 XT at both 1440p and 4K. But for the purposes of today's video, I'm only going to focus on 4K because that's the only thing AMD's given us so far. So if we take the RTX 4080's performance number of 14,178 and divided by the 6950 XT's performance number of 10,644, we can see that the 4080 is approximately 33% faster at 4K over the 6950 XT. Now, I'm only putting this in here as just a simple FYI. It doesn't really have too much of a bearing on the 7900 XTX. But going back to the 6950 XT's performance number of 10,644, and if we take that number and multiply it by 1.5, we get a brand new number of 15,966. Now, if we take that number and divide it by the RTX 4080's number of 14,178, you can see very clearly we have about a 13% performance increase over the 4080. So when we look at the charts that AMD gave us, and you start at the bottom with 1.5 times performance over the 6950 XT, we can see that that alone will put us in a range of being about 13% faster than the RTX 4080 at native 4K. No ray tracing, no upscaling or anything like that. Now, if the 7900 XTX can perform even better than 1.5 times the 6950 XT, then that means the performance gap will only continue to increase. Now, if we take the 6950 XT's performance and multiply it by 1.6, we get a brand new number of 17,030. If we take that number and divide it by the 4080's 14,178 performance score, we now have a performance increase of 20% over the RTX 4080. And if we do all of this one more time, but this time we multiply by 1.7, that brings us up to almost a 28% performance increase over the RTX 4080. Now, again, I cannot stress enough, synthetics do not always mean gaming performance, and you have to take these numbers with a fat grain of salt, because at the end of the day, AMD gave us these numbers from 1.5 to 1.7. They could have games where they're only improving by 1.3 or 1.4. I don't think that's really going to be the case most times, but it is possible. And on top of all of that, this does not include ray tracing. The RTX 4080 will still likely be better at ray tracing over the 7900 XTX. But what you have to think about now is pricing. The 7900 XTX starts off at $999. But the 4080 starts off at $1199. And of course, both cards only go up from there. But the fact remains, AMD will be cheaper. So you have to ask yourself, how important is ray tracing to you? If it means absolutely everything, then sure, fine, I guess go get a 4080. But keep a couple of things in mind. Number one, the 4080 is significantly cut down from the 4090. So I would not expect the exact same performance in ray tracing on the 4080 that you get on a 4090. I expect it to be significantly lower. And even if it is still respectable and better than Ampere and better than AMD, the fact remains in most games with ray tracing, you will likely be expected to turn on DLSS of some kind, whether if that's DLSS 2 or DLSS 3 with frame generation. But the fact is, you're probably expected to turn on DLSS to overcome the limitations of ray tracing. Now, with that being said, AMD has their own version of DLSS, and it's called FSR, and it's getting better every single day. AMD is planning to launch FSR 3, which does plan to have some type of frame generation capabilities similar to DLSS 3. So if you're okay with rolling the dice, so to speak, on getting an AMD card, what you can expect to get is a better card in terms of rasterization at a cheaper cost. So you can save money, get a nice performance uplift, and still not be too bad off in terms of overall ray tracing. But that's just my perspective based on the data that's given to me right now. Of course, all of this could completely change once the final benchmark numbers come out. And of course, I'm going to cover all of that. So be sure to get subscribed if you don't want to miss that type of content. And if you like this type of content, do me a favor, hit the like button because it goes a long way in helping me out. And if you want to know more about AMD's 7900 XT and 7900 XTX, then be sure to check this video out right over here. That's all I got. Thanks for stopping by. And until next time, E-Rock out.